knowledge, then they have the autonomy to then get engaged. And so I think it's very vital to ensure that that is in place, and also being inclusive in communicating with the local registrars and town clerks to also have the buy-in, especially rollback. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Alderman Brackeen.
And yes, not to repeat anything that was basically mentioned, I agree. I agree with all my colleagues and what has already been stated, but I'll add something different. I am indeed a founder of a voting rights organization called Generation Change Connecticut. And we've, while most of my colleagues are at the Capitol Legislature, I've actually been on the other end of that, advocating on the grassroots level with many voting rights organizations such as Common Cause and many others around the state around all of these issues. And yes, I'd like to highlight, we should really get the Voting Rights Act passed in a comprehensive way to address all of these many issues that we're discussing.
Thank you, Alderman. And last, State Representative Elliott.
So 8 years ago, when this failed for the first time, part of the reason was that the language of the constitutional amendment was written in some clunky legalese. And the idea is that if you go to the ballot box and you can't understand what the question means when you're there, you're probably going to vote no. I think a couple things are different this time around. First is the language is a lot better. And the other is the fact that we lived through what early voting and no excuse voting can look like last year. And people are more familiar with it. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second is that to create a system that allows for early voting and no excuse voting, you have to do a lot of things anyway. So even if the constitutional amendments fail, we have to, and this is going to go back to that incredibly toxic word in this field, regionalization, because whether it's voting for people who are incarcerated, or it is talking about ranked choice voting, or it's talking about robust early voting and no excuse absentee voting, you need to have regionalized systems. And I think the problem right now that we have with talking about regionalization is inherent in that argument is this idea that clerks and registrars aren't doing a good job. But the fact is that they are under-resourced and they're under-supported. And yes, some of it is the actual monetary resources, but a lot of it is just in terms of how much support are they getting from the Secretary of State's office. So if it fails, you still come back to it 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years down the line. You don't give up because it's a significantly better system, but there's ways in which we have to implement this system that we can fix along the way.
I just got a text from our friend Steve that he's frozen. So let me keep this going. I think that
I think
I'm back.
Oh, you're back.
Yeah.
Okay, Eloisa's up next. Eloisa, you have
Great.
the floor.
So reading a question from the Q&A, starting with Representative Santiago. The Secretary of State, in the absence of relevant statutory guidance, can make written directives that have the force of law on election-related issues. 2 parts. Do you favor making these directives transparent and visible on the Secretary of State's website? Second, will you ensure that you get the regular input and perspective of the registrars and town clerks in shaping directives, legislative proposals, and procedures? And for any of the candidates it's written, you can see it in the Q&A that we all have access to. So no, it's long. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay.
There you go.
Absolutely. I think it's very important that we share any information that either comes from the feds or any changes at the state immediately, and be transparent with the registrars and the city clerks, whether you pull them all into a meeting or a Zoom meeting, explain what the changes are going to be. That's one of the things that when I've been going around the state, that they've had a concern about, that they don't want to read about it, in the newspaper, and they don't want a press advisory sent out that some changes and that they don't know about. I think I plan to have an open door policy. I want to meet also with the registrars and town clerks. They have a set meeting through the Connecticut Association of Town Clerks and Registrars. And that meeting through the Legislative Committee is every 6 months. I plan to have that meeting at least every 2 months in order to keep the open line of communication. And it's very important that they also know that when things are mandated, that the state is behind them, and the state provides the resources and the funding in order to make it easier for them, especially with technology. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Representative Thomas?
Transparency is my middle name, and one of those things I'm passionate about. Anyone on the Norwalk DTC knows when I first arrived on the scene, the first thing I did was organize a session to see how people get elected or appointed to boards and commissions. And my platform, if you will, has been demystifying government for the everyday people through my session snippets and many other things that I've done since elected. So anything I can do to make the process more transparent, I will do. The second part of the question, yes, registrars and town clerks. We learned a lot of great lessons, one silver lining with COVID. And I think of the example of Commissioner Beth Bai, who was having, and many other departments, who was having weekly calls that early childhood workers could dial into, get the latest information, give input, etc. I think the secretary has to do something like that with the registrars and town clerks. Not only would it allow them to learn from one another, given so many resignations over the last 2 years, but it opens up a dialogue and a trust that I think has been lacking recently. And I am about people, not politics. So the more I talk to the people, the better.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. And yes, we do know that in Norwalk. Director Bond?
Thank you so much. And I agree with Stephanie. I was actually doing that work all along in the last 2 years, where we had to provide information on a daily basis and be transparent, even when it's tough information. In the last few weeks, even when we have to make tough decisions, we have to make sure that at the end of the day, we are informing the public, whether good news or bad news, but giving the information out to the public to making sure that individuals have that knowledge and awareness. And I will do the same. And so the short answer to both those questions is yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Director Bond. Alder Brackeen?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to offer a resounding yes to both the questions. I think it's absolutely vital that transparency, and the key word that I mentioned earlier is collaboration. And I'm not speaking about that just kind of out of theory. I experienced during this pandemic season, the missed opportunities that was had in order to have clear-cut, constant collaboration and communication with the city town clerks and voter registrars in many cities and towns across the state. As part of the work that I do with Generation Change CT, we were a part of the fielding of many issues and hurdles and trying to solve the problems that many of the city town clerks and voter registrars experience because of the lack of communication that might have been had during those times. So I'm absolutely making a strong commitment to ensure that there is a constant communication on a weekly basis, and that there is a representation coming out of that conference task force to ensure that that consistency and transparency is followed through as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I just had to cough, so that'll be easier off camera. Representative Elliott?
Yes to both. So there are two things I did last year that were formative in terms of how I view this race. The first is that I was a moderator at a Fairfield election site, and the other is that I went to Colorado to see how they undergo their elections. The first gives me an incredible amount of appreciation for the people that actually do this work day in, day out. What the second meant for me was what I saw was they told me that they got to their system over the course of 15 years through an iterative process. But not only that, their county clerks and their Secretary of State's office work as a political bloc. And that's one thing that we've really been missing, is this idea that you allow the people that are on the front of this to actually be pushing for the ideas that they want to make changes to every single year. And the Secretary of State's office, by being in Hartford, in our circumstance in Connecticut, has the ability to push a lot of these things because you are there and so close to the legislative process. I'm just thinking about when I brought in my general manager for Common Bond, and this whole idea was, have an idea for where you want to go, but the first few months, you've got to be talking to people that are in the front line and what they're facing and what they're dealing with, because those are the things you have to fix right now. Help them fix their things, get buy-in from people that are actually holding up this organization. And then once you have that buy-in, as you're making these iterative changes, you can be moving towards where you eventually want to go. And you eventually are probably going to see that you're more on the same page than you recognize.
Thank you, Representative Elliott. Senator Lesser, the last one.
Yeah, thank you, Eloisa. It's a really important question. And when you look at the state budget, a budget is a statement of values. It's literally what you value. And we have allowed the Secretary of State's office to wither. Right now, by some counts, there are only 6 people working on elections in the Secretary of State's office. And the only thing I can get from that is that we don't value elections. And the real consequences, if you are a local elections administrator and you're trying to get consistent, timely access to information about how to conduct an election, you're scrambling for that. And obviously we need to beef up the resources there, including putting information out publicly to give towns that information. But the public is also suffering as well, because if you go on the Secretary of State's website right now, you want to find out who's eligible to cast an absentee ballot in Connecticut right now, 2022. There's no easy document. There's no place to find it, right? Because there's nobody there. They don't have the staff to put that information out there. And that just dumps more responsibilities on local registrars and town clerks. It means they're scrambling to get information out, and that it's really hurting everyone. You know, democracy just doesn't happen anymore. I think for a long time, we just assumed that people would step up and run elections fairly in towns, and we wouldn't have to worry about the details. But unfortunately, we're not there anymore. We really have to support our town clerks and our registrars. We have to champion them. Even the most right-wing Republican out there is being accused of being part of the deep state right now. They're being accused of rigging elections. Look, we got to make sure that we're selling democracy to our Republican neighbors and our unaffiliated neighbors, but we also have to make sure that they have the resources to conduct free and fair elections.
Thank you. Tom?
Tom, you have the floor.
Great, thanks. Just looking at questions that have come in. This is one we haven't touched on at all. I haven't heard anybody address it. So I appreciate the question from Michael Flato, who writes, the bill allowing DMV to issue ex-gender IDs, by my understanding, directed all state agencies to update their forms to do the same. As of today, the voter registration forms posted on the Secretary of State's website still require a binary gender designation. What will you do as Secretary of State to allow Connecticut residents of all genders to register to vote under their correct gender? The question goes first to Representative Thomas. Stephanie.
Thank you. And thank you, Michael, for the question. The non-sexy campaign answer is that databases have to be able to talk to each other on the back end. And we just got a report, I believe, a few weeks ago from various agencies, and not every agency can change their fields yet to allow for that, but it is being worked on. And I think there are a lot of similar issues about gender IDs that we've been hearing in the Government Administration and Elections Committee, and the same stumbling block keeps coming up, that the back end can't account for it. So we will be advocating to make sure that that all catches up. I feel like I should be a politician and pivot to something else I want to talk about, so I will. I was speaking with the registrar about these databases earlier, and he was mentioning how things like umlauts and accent marks cannot be read by the state's database. And these are just fundamental things that, you know, I think disenfranchise people subconsciously. If you can't even have your name recognized when you register to vote, what signal are we sending? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. Same question to Director Bond. Maritza?
Hi, you know, when we're modernizing systems, this is an example of making sure that the systems, again, I agree with our current, say Representative Thomas, when we talk about systems being able to update the fields, but I think when we're talking about identity, people should be able to, of course, be able to identify as they wish.
Thank you. We're going to go next to Alder Brackeen. Can I just make a point though? Anybody who has questions, please submit them into the Q&A function. That's the only place where we're responding. We'll try to get through as many as we can. Daryl, you're up on the same question.
Yes, absolutely. Really not changing anything that's already been said. I suspect this issue is likely going to be worked on this year in an aggressive way. I strongly believe that if this is still an issue, if I'm granted the opportunity to be the next Secretary of State, yes, this is going to be a priority that we fix.
Thank you. And Representative Elliott, Josh on the ID.
I see this as a question about asking if we commit to working on this issue, and I think the answer for me is yes, and it sounds like the answer for my colleagues and friends is also yes. I will say that the work to get the DMV to agree to do this did take time. I think from beginning to end it took about a year. If I recall, it was Representative Michelle from Stanford who was actually leading on this issue. I'm in incredible support of this. I think this sends exactly the message that we want to send from our state government, that everybody belongs in part of our political system and political structure and needs to be recognized. So I am committed to this work.
Thank you so much. Senator Lesser, the same question.
Yeah, everything has been said, but not everyone has said it. No, we need to update our forms. I think that's pretty clear. I will just say I worked with Representative Michelle and Representative Curry to make sure that our driver's licenses were inclusive. I also introduced the bill to allow intersex individuals to get non-binary birth certificates. Our voter registration form should be brought into the 21st century. And also this is why Republican laws to require mandatory photo ID are so dangerous, because it really impacts the ability of all sorts of marginalized communities to vote, including the trans community. So I think it's really important.
Thank you. And Representative Santiago, hold on the same question. Nope.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's a very important question, and it's something that we're starting to move forward in the state of Connecticut by changing the systems, but the computer systems don't even talk to each other. And we found that out that there has to be a lot of upgrade in the state system, especially when the unemployment issue for the last 2 years, and there still is a problem where they had to get a lot of money from the feds in order to upgrade the computer system. But it's not just for the Department of Labor, through DMV, through DSS. All those changes have to be made. And eventually the federal government will catch up with that. When will that happen? I don't know. But it also is going to affect Social Security cards, when people are going to be applying for Social Security cards. And it's something that we should really work through the GAE committee to make sure that everybody is in the same page at the same table and making these changes go forward.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom.
That's everybody on this question. Back to you, Steve.
Yes, thank you, Tom. The next and final round of questions, we'll start with Director Bond. And the question in the Q&A box is that the Office of Secretary of State is an executive position. Can you discuss what type of executive experience you have managing at this level, where you would be managing 50 to 100 employees and an annual department budget of $20 billion?
Yeah, well, that actually describes my current job description. I actually have over 120 employees approximately, and also manage over $20 million budget. And I think for me, what's important in serving in this government executive role is really the fact that you have to make sure that you're working with your team, understanding your workforce infrastructure internally, as well as working as a collaborator with those externally. And so I have been able to successfully do that in the last 6 years in 2 government entities, the largest city in Connecticut, and then also our 3rd largest city. And so it's with great pleasure that I bring that experience now and feel that that's what distinguishes me from the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bond. Same question for Alderman Brackeen.
Thank you very much for the question. And actually, in my personal professional life, I've already mentioned having served as a nonprofit executive of 4 YMCAs at the same time, with over 300 staff, upwards of multi-million-dollar budgets that I had to personally raise and be accountable for. So yes, I do have that experience. And then on the other hand, as an alder, we are co-leaders in this city of New Haven in terms of management of the budget and all of the offices. And I actually serve as the chairman of Health and Human Services, where I directly approve all of the grants of the health department. So I can vouch for Director Bond in terms of her leadership as well.
Thank you, Alderman. Same question for Representative Elliott.
So I grew up in a business. My mother started her first store in '94, and then Time and Season in '97. And today we co-own and run a business with somewhere between 85 to 100 employees. We don't quite have an operating budget of 20 million yet, but we'll get there. And my feeling is this: is that I have the experience to work well with people, and I believe that if you put good people around you, get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off. The big difference, though, what I would say about state government versus running your own business is that you are a little bit more limited in terms of changing who is and is not on the bus, which means that you do need somebody who is skilled at having conversational ability and setting an agenda with a wide array of people, and that's something that I think I do really well. I intend to set the goals of the organization, but then have the people that are there really be the ones to effectuate, and then act as somebody who provides support to those people. That's what I find in my role as owner of these businesses, is that very rarely am I telling people what to do. The vast majority of my time is saying, what is it you're trying to accomplish, and how can I give you the tools that you need to make sure you can do your job well?
Thank you, Representative Elliott. Senator Lesser.
Yes, thank you, Steve. And as I mentioned earlier, I've had the privilege of working with Denise Merrill on every major voting reform over the last 12 years. And so, I come to this with a deep knowledge of the Secretary of State's office. I also oversee, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, a $48 billion biennial state budget. And as a chair of 2 subcommittees, I'm personally responsible for about 20 billion of that total, overseeing that. And that's a lot of responsibility. And I know the office inside and out. So I've had to, most of the employees of the office I know personally. The cybersecurity director, for example, is a constituent of mine. The director of the commercial recording division is a neighbor of mine. And so, I think it's important to look at both our experience, but also our knowledge of what we're getting ourselves into, because this is such an important job. It makes sense to have people who are ready to do it on day one.
Thank you, Senator Lesser. Representative Santiago.
I've had an experience as a Head Start director, where I've dealt with $1 million budgets, working along with parents at the Policy Council. I have experience working with Director of Shelter Now in Meriden. I also worked with the local hospital with doing community outreach, and I also worked with housing. But my experience more has been with being on the City Council and being the finance director, being the chair of the Finance Committee at the local level, dealing with billions of dollars to work through every department and have input to every department that is run through the city, along with the city manager, and work with their presentations. I've also sit on the Finance and Bonding Revenue Committee now. I've been on that committee now for the last 10 years. And for the first time that I've been there, back in 2017, we had a bipartisan budget. So it's important not only to work with your party, but it's important to work with the other party and have a consensus of how to bring out a budget. And we've dealt with billions of dollars. We have a rainy day fund that is overflowing, and that that takes a lot of work. Working along with Sean's Representative Scaling on that as a chair of the committee has helped a lot. But we also have to work as a team, and we have to be able to trust and respect who we're working with, and also being a good listener with the employees that you're working with. So I bring that experience.
Thank you, Representative Santiago. And lastly, Representative Thomas.
Thank you. One, I'll say ditto to everything my good friend Rep. Elliott said. As a small business owner, I would hope to get to 20 million, but I'm still at the multi-million mark. But as someone who's run a consulting firm, people don't think about that as multiple employees, but each client comes with multiple stakeholders. And I promise you that on a daily basis, before I ran for state rep, I was dealing with hundreds of people daily. My inbox had 700 emails every single day, 7 days a week. And I was working on fundraising projects that aggregated about $30 million a year that I was responsible for implementing. And I just think it's a good question, but the most important question to me that I've learned in building my business is not only what you lead, but how you lead. And making sure that you have the right people around you, you know what your strengths are and how to shore them up, if it's not a strength. I also have my master's in nonprofit management, which for anyone who doesn't know is basically like an MBA program for people who plan to lead a nonprofit one day. And I can send you my transcripts from my financial management coursework. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. There are still questions in the chat, but we've hit our time limit for the forum. So please, if you have questions, reach out individually to the candidates and they will be happy to talk with you and email you responses. So I want to thank all the candidates here and the candidate Sean Scanlon for Comptroller. It is clear to me that we have 6 outstanding candidates for Secretary of State, and I want to thank you all. I want to thank our digital moderators, Lauren Meyer and Robin Druckman. And I want to thank our other moderators, Tom Dubin and Eloisa. And turn it over to you, Eloisa.
Thanks, Steve. I too want to thank everyone, the other moderators, Robin, candidates, and the attendees. There are many things that you can do on a Sunday afternoon. And you're here listening to this because you all take it very seriously, that you'll probably be delegates and be able to vote at our convention in May. And so I thank you all for taking the time to be a part of this. And I really want to thank the candidates for taking the time to do this. I know you guys must be tired of like running around our whole state. I mean, you signed up for it, but I still just want to say thank you because you really could be doing anything else. And this is what you're choosing to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
And I just want to make 2, in addition to thanking everybody, I just want to make 2 observations. One, we have such great candidates. This is a wonderful group. Ultimately, it's going to come down to one person, whoever he or she is. I trust that everybody on this call, candidates and all participants, are eager to back and to work as hard for somebody who you weren't initially supporting as you will for whoever ends up being our candidate, Democratic candidate. And the second shout out is to Zoom. This is an extraordinary thing that we had the confidence and capacity to do this kind of a meeting. A few years ago, you guys all would have been in your car, you would have gotten half the audience. So thank you to Zoom and thank you for everybody for taking the time on a Sunday.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care, everyone.